tardes.
Good afternoon. So we're going to start the afternoon session of the 11th World Conference on Bioethics that is held in Gijón, Spain. And now we will have in the first panel as chairman Professor Serafín Marcos Costella, who is a professor at the University of Oviedo, Physical Radiology. Good afternoon, and you have the floor, Professor. Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Dr. Palacios. It is a pleasure for me to be here chairing this panel. And without further ado, we'll give the floor to the first speaker, Mr. Federico de Montalvo, President of the Bioethics Committee of Spain, as well as Director of the Center of Innovation and Law, ICADE. And the title of his presentation is a question that I guess he will try to answer during his talk. Are there any norms in the times of biotechnological disruption when bio law gets closer to bioethics? So, Mr. Federico Montalvo, you have the floor. Good afternoon. I hope you can hear me well. Firstly and foremost, thank you very much to the Scientific Committee of SIBI for having invited me, and thank you, Mr. Palacios. I will not use the formal presentation because then my talk will be more dynamic. It would have been a pleasure to have visited Gijón, and because I love Gijón, and as most a member of the Scientific Committee of the SIBI and also President of the Bioethical Committee of Spain. Next year, we will be celebrating 25 years of the convention. And next year, if I am right, we will celebrate 20 years of the law of autonomy of the patient in Spain. I think this pandemic is, giving us very bad times, but however, in terms of bio law and bioethics, the pandemic has given them many items to reflect upon and to learn from. As the chairman mentioned, my talk is in the form of trying to give an answer to a question. No? I guess that if the talk is entitled with a question, people will expect me to reply to that question. But the question is a result of a research I have been doing recently in terms of innovation and the cluster 9, economic dissemination, etc., etc. And the chair, Francisco Ayala from the University of Comillas, asked me to participate in some events on this topic, and some of the International Committee on Bioethics also address this topic. Some of the members are listening or participating, or also participating, as I said, as speakers. There was a curious case in terms of the researcher in China, Louis and Nana, those initially embryos that later on became kids, no girls. In the framework of this research project regarding the legal issues and CRISPR-Cas9, you know, it has problems in terms of safety, but we have a tool that is being used, commonly used. I am not an expert on bioethics. I am a legal expert, professor of constitutional law. Right now, I am chairing the Spanish Bioethics Committee. As a legal expert, my concern was how to regulate in the future all these new advances and problems, and what a way In law, we have two regulatory methodologies, either by means of specific norms the example is, for example, a traffic sign. It could say 30 or 40 or 50. And if you drive faster, you will get a ticket. And other example is that you cannot go below 70. And if you go, slower than 70, you will get a ticket. The norm is very accurate. The principle is more flexible, and I can adapt it to a situation in which driving at 40 is appropriate, 60 is appropriate, or 70 is not appropriate. The principle is much more flexible than the norm. In fact, during the pandemic, we have heard that two principles have gained importance. The principle of precaution and the principle of proportionality. The Minister of Health mentioned that we have to close or we have to draft these kind of measures be according to the precautionary principle. We're not talking about norms, but rather principles, because the law could not foresee the usefulness of what's going to happen. So as for the analysis of CRISPR-Cas9 in terms of resulting problems, my concern was how I, as a legal expert, should face the regulation of that phenomenon. Because I guess we all agree that it is necessarily regulated. There were two researchers I contacted. One has already died. But with those contacts, my mind was kind of open. I published a book just 1 week before the pandemic broke out. Two authors, Garcia Enterria, Eduardo Garcia Enterria. He is from Cantabria. He holds a chair in administrative law. He is one of the parents of this law. He is one of the fathers of public law in America, and he died some years ago. To access the chair, he wrote an article or a document that was later on published on the role of principles in the future of legal order. He wrote it in the 60s, and then some years after, many years after, Ernesto Vidal, professor of law philosophy at the University of Valencia, wrote some interesting works on how law was getting closer to the solution of problems of bioethics. So there was a kind of a debate between bioethics and law, how important it is to have a norm, etc., etc. I think bioethics is more important than biolaw, by the way. And he used to say that principles were going to have a role in the regulation of all these principles. So law was copying the way of solving problems by bioethics. So my work became a book, no? Afterwards. And these authors suggested me some ideas. Is it better to have a flexible, open norms, as for example, proportionality principle, or an accurate, specific law or norm? And in that book, I tried to give an answer to this question. Curiously enough, as I said before, this book was published, and later on I published other articles in this line. next year, I am going to officially open the university course, even talking about these topics. So whether or not we should apply principles or norms is a very interesting debate, and it is the same as debate as we are facing these days. Medicine and CRISPR-Cas9 go also in this line of action since March, but more with more relevance. In these days, we have been discussing something that has to do with the pandemic. Pandemic is a new phenomena for us, but the first pandemic, it started many, many years ago. In Spain, as in many other countries, we are discussing when to, leave the lockdown, no? Many legal experts, many counselors, many presidents of different associations, autonomous communities, courts as well. The football league was finishing last week. I had a hard time drafting a document on the right to choose vaccines. And at least on Saturday, I had a happy time when my team won the league. And then on Monday, I was happy again because I got the vaccine, the jab. I was telling my friends that now we have two leagues, the football one and the league of the justice court. Because some days ago, when the state of alert was lifted, then some autonomous communities started to say whether or not they should continue with the state of alert. Balearic Isles said yes, 1-1. For example, Navarra, yes, 1-1, no, 1-1, and then whatever. And Supreme Court will have to say something in this regard very soon. And what I'm telling you this, well, because if you recall, a president from a community, Galicia, Núñez Feijóo, proposed to change the law in terms of public health to incorporate some clauses, specific norms that would allow the autonomous communities to limit the rights in state of alert. And in Spain, we have a law, organic law, that includes principles and says you can limit freedoms of individuals as long as those measures are adopted to protect their health. For some people, that is a principle, protection of collective health. For some people, that is not enough. For some courts, and however, for those who say that that is not enough, they will need some norms. Something like when there is such a rate of people, you can lock down a village, a town, a city. So regarding the debate on whether principles or norms, well, that is an open debate. How do we face the adoption of measures that limit rights in the framework of the pandemic with a wide limitation that in the end is a principle that connects with the methodology of bioethics or with an accurate norm that is not very flexible, that cannot be very much adapted, but maybe it is safer? The proposal I would like to make, or that I have defended, some of my colleagues do not agree with me, however, is that the regulation of all this advance of genomic editing should be based on principles and not on norms. That is, flexible norms, open norms. For example, you can talk about the precautionary principle and use it as a tool for further adoption. I think this world of uncertainty, of constant changes, only law can solve issues by incorporating open formulae. For example, in bioethics, they are the basic principles of bioethics. In bioethics, you propose solutions on the basis of no maleficiency, protection of vulnerability, justice, etc., etc. Bioethics operates on the basis of principles. In fact, this is an idea launched by Ernesto Vidal, and I also support. And he says that if law to regulate this future has to be better based on principles than in norms, on accurate or specific norms, then law will get closer to bioethics. So that the big brother is bioethics and the little brother is law. Law, in the end, copies the way to solve conflicts from bioethics, because bioethics, and by the way, it has a lot to do with how to do law, the common law, the North American common law, much more based on cases. Bioethics comes very much from the States and the common law, and adapts much more to complex issues. More flexible, let's say. The fact of regulating these conflicts, these dilemmas, with principles, not to say that such A is prohibited, but rather the principle of protection of the individual operates or prevails. The principle of precaution prevails, etc., etc. More flexible, more open. My opinion, this poses advantages, flexibility. Principles are more flexible. We can foresee a possible fact. Is reality flexible? Yes, the reality is changing constantly. I think pandemic has come hand in hand with changes. No, what financial experts call volatility, or many of us call uncertainty. Many people say the pandemic came with the uncertainty, but uncertainty was already here and has come to stay. The norm describes the factual situation, but not the principle. You do not need to describe the factual situation so that it fits in with reality. In the principle, it is not necessary, so it is much more adapted to reality. And principles also have a virtue. I am a member of the scientific committee of bioethics of the UNESCO, and that committee, we try to make proposals. Look at this map that I have behind. Well, it is not my map, but someone put it there because I have another talk later on, and they put this map behind, and I thought, well, just leave it there for my previous talk. Globalization. I think principles allow to globalize legal and ethical solutions to general problems. I can now address global problems. The problems in terms of subrogated gestation, for example, they are global problems. So principles are easy to be shared globally by all countries, all continents. And in fact, in UNESCO, the International Committee on Bioethics, we work a lot on principles and very little on norms, because sometimes problems demand solutions that have to be flexible. Principles are much more global and much more adaptable. We will be able to work on what Adela Cortina, the ethics of minimum values or minimum principles. And for law of minimum principles, we need the minimum principles. Hindrances or inconveniences. Of course, principles also have many benefits and advantages, but principles also pose inconveniences or hindrances, limitations. For example, legal insecurity or legal uncertainty. For example, you see a sign and you say, if I go faster than 60, I will get a ticket. For example, you go from Madrid to Oviedo by car. You know that you will get a ticket if you go at 135 kilometers an hour. You calculate and you say, well, I prefer a ticket, but I will get to Oviedo half an hour earlier. So you can calculate your own consequences. However, in the principle is the following. The sign says it's prohibited to go faster at speed in which the person is being endangered. It is more difficult to calculate the consequences. The norm is much more immobile, less flexible. The problem has to do with legal uncertainty. The principle poses a greater legal uncertainty. For example, in terms of investment, those companies that want to invest, the norm is more clear. But the principle also poses another problem. It alters the countries of the civil law, the European countries, not so much the UK and United States, because they are on the side of the common law. It alters the division of powers. Why? Because when we talk about norms, the judge just applies to a factual um, decision what the norm says. And then the legal consequence will be A, if that person drove at 70 or this person left home when during lockdown, that person gets a ticket. When a judge finds a principle, the judge gets more power, has greater power, because he will decide through the interpretation of that principle. That is, through the principle, the legislature has a very important a role to play, but the judges even more. Once the state of alert finishes, there is a problem regarding limitation of rights. Well, a judge wants a clear norm. You cannot lock down, we will just have such or such rates. No? To tell the judge that the public administration can adopt all the measures demanded to protect collective protection according to such and such principle, for a judge, it is much more difficult. He needs to invest a little bit more of intellectual mindset to solve the problem. Probably we can only face these challenges with principles, but what is the challenge in the years to come? We have to make an effort to inform our judges very well, because probably the judges can have to solve the bioethical dilemma on the basis of principles and not on the basis of norms. They will have to interpret the principles, they will have to apply principles, and for that they need some training on bioethics. When the university invited 2 years ago to the Committee on Bioethics of Spain to give training to judges on bioethics, I said this is the way to go, because judges have to solve the health problems. Who is solving the problems between individual and collective rights? Well, the judges, the Supreme Court, the Constitutional Court. So therefore, for the judges, it is very important to get some training on bioethics. And finally, someone can say, well, you are extinguishing fire with fire. I am solving uncertainty as brought about by innovation with uncertain norms, that is, principles. It is not a contradiction to solve uncertainty with legal uncertainty? No. The only way to address a scientific uncertainty by ethical uncertainty is with uncertainty, with principles, with flexible norms. Uncertainty is faced with uncertainty. The limitation of fundamental rights in the framework of this pandemic can only be faced with clauses, with principles, with flexible norms. So scientific uncertainty can only be addressed by uncertainty. What we have to do is to define those principles very well. And I will conclude with the following or last idea, as well as training judges, because judges will have a very important role to play. Judges will not only be a good legislator, legislating very well with good principles, flexible principles. We need trained judges that can apply those principles. And Bioethics Committee will also have to play a very important role. They will have to participate more and more in the decision-making processes. On Wednesday, just 1 minute before visiting my physiotherapist because I have a problem with my shoulder and with the vaccine, well, it was more painful. So I was at the physiotherapist, and before, just 5 minutes before lying down, I got a call from the ministry talking to me about the report to administer vaccines. A report that we drafted within 48 hours only. Some friends of mine wrote to me and said, "Oh, bad luck." Others said, "Oh my God." But what are you doing giving your opinion on vaccines? No, the people from the bioethics. I think in future the role of the bioethics committee at hospitals, the committee in Spain, the autonomous one, for example, the one in Asturias, the committee of the UNESCO, the committee of Europe, they will play a more and more important role. Because when the judge applies the principle to solve that conflict, and not a norm, one of the tools he will use is to ask the committees, the bioethics committees, so that the committees can provide information to make the best decision. When the ministry asked us the other day, I thought it was good that the committee made a statement because it was not a problem in terms of vaccines. The problem was the people that you have to vaccinate. And if the ethics has nothing to say in such a disruptive situation as a pandemic, is it useful bioethics? So the same as the ministry asked the bioethics committee about its opinion, or if someone decides not to get vaccinated and gets to a court and the judge says this or that, or maybe someone says that there is no right to choose. I think in those situations, maybe the role of the committees can be very important to help the judges make decisions. So I will now reply the question finally. Law by law should face the regulation of this dilemma on the basis of principles, flexible norms, adaptable norms, principles such as proportionality and precautionary principle. This means that judges have a very important role to play in the future. We have to train judges much more on bioethics. And finally, I think that the same as law got closer to bioethics is copying the methodologies of bioethics, how to solve things on the basis of principles, etc., etc. I think bioethics committee, hospitals, national level, regional level, autonomous level have a very important role to play in the decision-making process. In a world in which uncertainty will not be vanished, at all. We have to attack it or fight it with flexibility and also uncertainty. I hope the chairman does not tell me off, and I hope that he has the answer to the question. And if you have any question or any comment, I will be more than happy to elaborate on that. And I hope that next year, that is a great year for Oviedo, for the International Society of Bioethics. I hope we can visit that beautiful autonomous community, limiting with Cantabria, where I was born. So I am partially from Cantabria and partially from Finland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Federico. Of course, you have answered the question, and I think you've been very clarifying on all of the concepts that you've touched upon. And I'm happy that the law is based on the principles, because we have seen throughout the pandemic that physicians have there haven't been many discrepancies in decision making, and we knew what decisions had to be made throughout the different Spanish regions. And I think it's very interesting to hear that message for the public, for the population, for that message to really come through, and not only be shared among jurors and legal experts. I don't know if we're going to have time for questions. You stuck to your allocated time, and I would not want to delay the interventions of the next speakers. Erin Williams, a portfolio director, biomedical innovation managing director of Matrix Corporation Health, FFRGC, and she will hold a talk, biotechnology, medicine, and environment, a path from warnings to equal opportunities. Erin, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Castilla. It is wonderful to be here with you all virtually. Can you hear okay? Yes? Okay. I really want to thank Dr. Palacios and all of the organizers of the International Bioethics Society for being so flexible and bringing us all together virtually. I miss, of course, seeing my wonderful friends from SIBI and the scientific committee in person and sharing meals together, and I look forward to that in the future. But I'm very pleased to see how accommodating the group is, and maybe even there's room for looking at how to present virtually in the future to make it more equal for us all to come together. So thank you very much for hosting this way. I'm going to share some slides this morning. All right. Can you see the slides? Yes? I'm going to assume I'm sharing. So to continue the conversation about responsible use of biotechnology and medicine and the environment, I think that this presentation will actually flow quite nicely from Mr. Montalvo's presentation. We're going to focus on today what it means to use biotechnology responsibly. I have the privilege of being joined today by a colleague, Dr. Irving Lacho, and I will introduce him and show him to you in just a couple of minutes. He's sitting here by my side. Today we're going to give you a brief introduction and talk a little bit about the uses of biotechnology and in the environment. I know that's covered by many other speakers, and answer a question that I always like to cover at the beginning of any presentation, which is, why do we care? Why is it important to look at what responsible use means for biotechnology and the environment? Then we'll get into a little bit more detail about what responsible use means and introduce you to the social justice platform and the equity framework that are a couple of things that MITRE has developed that I think would be really useful to to the larger community, to society, in determining what responsible use means. And then we will, I believe, have some time at the end to, of course, thank many collaborators who helped us and to have a conversation and answer any questions. So in order to understand and really frame, especially the social justice platform that we'll be talking about, it helps to understand a little bit about MITRE, the company where both Dr. Lacho and I work. MITRE is a not-for-profit, and we operate in the public interest. We have for years. We play a special role with the government here in the United States and perform often close to inherently governmental work. And we operate in a way that is free from conflict of interest and very mission-driven, focused on creating a safer and healthier world. So it is that from that perspective that we've done our work and that we offer to share the frameworks today. Biotechnology, as you know, I think everyone probably here knows, has many, many types of applications in medicine and the environment. And it is a very powerful tool in everything from agriculture to genetic engineering to wearables and biodiversity. There are many, many very powerful positive and negative applications. And they can lead to, in society, why we care, can be used, for example, to increase crop yields and provide more food, sometimes provide jobs, provide medicine. You know, I think we've all been very focused for the last year on one particular application from biotechnology driving toward a vaccine for the coronavirus, for COVID-19. And biotechnology can be used to clean the environment as well. There are many, there are dual uses, though, for many of these things. To understand how to create a vaccine, you really have to understand the pathogen. So with the same knowledge comes the opportunity for things like bioterrorism. So there's a positive and negative application of the same technology. At the same time, there are within positive applications, sometimes potentially negative consequences. So if you're using, genetically modified foods and seeds in order to create increased crop yield, there's potential for genetic drift, for maybe other consequences on the environment, and the like. So it's necessary to have ways to evaluate these positive and negative impacts of biotechnology that enable us to be able to maximize the positive and either avoid or mitigate the negative. It's useful as we look further to refer back to Dr. Potter's definition of global bioethics, that it is biotechnology combined with diverse humanistic knowledge, forging a science that sets a system of medical and environmental priorities acceptable for survival. And the way that we get from this broad definition, that is so it provides a North Star into practical applications, is not always clear because, as Mr. Montalvo stressed during his presentation, there is uncertainty and there may be precautionary or other principles that need to be applied as the science and the state of our understanding evolves. With that in mind, as we look to kind of ground what responsible use means, we look to broad definitions, looking at the risks and benefits or burdens. Within that, it's important always to look both at the immediate, the short term, and then the longer term views. And I like to refer frequently back to Native American principles of the seventh generation and evaluating what it will look like for our children's children, seven generations, meaning our direct descendants, our immediate relatives, but they're people that we will never meet. And our obligation to them to provide them with with a world that will be beneficial to them. And as we look at those, then we look at ways that we can mitigate the risks and reduce the burdens if there are some. And in addition to that, when we look at them, at these risks and burdens, we should look at whether they are distributed equitably. Are the risks all falling and the burdens all on one portion of the population and the benefits all flowing to another? And what do we do with that? And so Dr. Lacha is going to join in a moment to talk a little bit about social justice and equity as a mechanism to practically make that kind of assessment and figure out how to evaluate technologies in that way. And then with those tools, you can move to the policy issues about, well, who decides and when and how. Could be private sector, could be government. And I realized from Dr. Montalvo's presentation, I omitted judges. They should definitely be included as well because they are obviously part of the evaluation and decision making, and look at consequences. So with that, it's my pleasure to turn it over to Dr. Lacha to talk about the important components of responsible use of biotechnology. Dr. Lacha.
Thank you, Erin. Buenas tardes. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. So I'm going to begin by defining what we mean by social justice and equity. And so the term that we use for social justice is really looking at equal access to wealth, to opportunities and privileges within a society. And our principle of equity follows a similar guideline. So in the picture here, you see in the top half, there's a definition of equality. And it's represented by different people who have different needs getting the same resource, in this case, a bicycle. But you could imagine that being a technology, a program, a policy, some kind of benefit. When we think equality, it's everyone getting the same. Principle of equity is each person getting what they need. And so you can see in the picture below, everyone's getting a bicycle that's tailored to their needs. And that's what we're focused on when we think of equity. And that's how we think in terms of social justice. Recently, MITRE established what we call a social justice platform, which is a collection of data, tools, and frameworks that help us create solutions that address social, economic, and health equities. So our platform has been primarily focused on helping MITRE internally do work that Erin described to support our government sponsors and help us make the world a safer place through that work, through our internal work of our 9,000 employees. But I'm pleased to announce that we're going to have an external website where we will offer up our platform capabilities to everyone. And that will be launching in late June. So if you're interested, I would ask that you send me an email. You'll get the address at the end of the presentation. And I'd be happy to let you know when the platform will be open to all of you. And we'd certainly love to get your inputs and collaborate with you. And you'll see in just a moment that collaboration is, in fact, a key principle of how we approach this issue. So this picture demonstrates how our platform works in terms of our team structure and how we think about the problem. The vertical lines that you see are issues that we are addressing. There are many, many social justice issues, as I'm sure you can imagine. And so we're starting with a small number where we think we can have an impact. So you see health is one, education, workforce, artificial intelligence, and looking at issues around equity, bias, and fairness there, and socioeconomic equity. The way we approach those issues is defined by the horizontal lines you see in the diagram. And each of those represents both a principle of our methodology as well as a team that we have that's actually doing that work. So we start by focusing on the human who is at the center of this. So we believe it's very important to look at how people are being affected by the technology, the system, the policy. And that seems intuitively obvious, but often these things are designed without direct consultation with those who will be affected. So oftentimes it can be easy for the expert, the engineer, the scientist to think they know what solution should be provided to others and not actually consult those others who will be affected. And so this team that we have ensures that we use tools and methodologies where we solicit inputs from those populations, whether it's data, direct consultation, advisory boards. There are many techniques to do that. And so we ensure that we are listening to those who are affected in our work, and we help others, our government partners and others do the same. So that's how we begin with thinking about the person who's affected. The next layer is using models, tools, and frameworks to help understand which are the critical variables that need to be addressed when addressing a particular topic. And as you know, these issues are very complicated. In fact, they are technically mathematically complex. You know, they're nonlinear systems. So it can be very challenging to understand where one should approach a problem when there are many variables that are affecting that solution. And so it can be helpful to use modeling techniques to try to determine where one can have the most impact, the most leverage, and also perhaps even to determine if a particular policy, program, or technology will be beneficial or harmful. So we have a team that's focused on doing that. And we are doing work, for example, with the city of Washington, D.C. in the United States to apply these models and frameworks to a study they are doing looking at the racial wealth gap in that city, so the difference in wealth between blacks and whites. And some of these techniques are proving very helpful there. The next layer down is data and visualization. So of course, we want to be data-driven as much as possible. Again, that seems intuitively obvious. Data is critical in understanding these problems. And if one gets access to good data, it's often possible to develop key insights and also to help one ask the right questions. And so you see in the vertical columns that we have, you'll see that it says policy and analytic questions. So framing the right questions to ask is actually very, very important, especially when looking at data. So we have a team that focuses on doing that and also identifying where there are data gaps, because often data is incomplete. Sometimes the data itself is biased. Sometimes different data sets are incompatible. And highlighting those issues is often important for policymakers because they can sometimes help in gathering that data or addressing those data gaps. So pointing that out to people is critically important. And the last principle is partnerships. So we at MITRE feel we have something to offer, but there are many, many others who have also have much to offer. And so we're doing our best to work with other non-governmental organizations, in some cases companies, universities, and a large network of partners to try to work together, leverage their strengths with our strengths, share data, share models to try to make the world a safer place. So finally, I just wanted to share with you our work that we've done recently. This work that we did, we created an equity assessment framework. It was developed in response to an executive order that came from the White House, so from President Biden, that required every U.S. government agency to do an assessment of a program or policy and focus that assessment on equity to ensure that populations, underserved populations, have access to that program and can get the benefits that they are entitled to. So agencies have to do those assessments, and they also have to develop plans for addressing issues that are highlighted by those assessments. So we created a framework to help agencies do that, and we believe this framework, even though it was developed for that purpose, can be applied much more broadly. So I just wanted to share with you very quickly the 4 principles of the framework. If you want to access the framework itself, it's available on MITRE's homepage. It's right on the front page. And you can just reach out to me and I'm happy to share it with you. It's free for all of you. So there are 4 steps in our process. The first is performing that actual assessment. which is a way to just understand where are you now in your assessing the equity of the program or policy, and really with respect to, in particular, underserved populations. What are a key step would be, for example, to identify barriers that might prevent people from accessing that program or policy as they are meant to. That's the first step. And many organizations kind of stop there. They do an equity assessment and they view it almost like an audit, and they don't do very much after that. Or maybe they develop a plan to address that, but the plan isn't viewed as sort of a long-term process. And we believe that that it has to be viewed as a long-term process and also a continuous process. So the next step is really to take the assessment findings that one found. First of all, validate those findings with the affected population. So again, it's easy to do an assessment just internally, right? To look within yourself, maybe hire someone to help you do the assessment. But again, it's important to then reach out to those who might be affected and say, this is what we found. Is this your experience? And you might find that people say, no, actually, what you said is hard isn't hard for us, but this is hard and you didn't find that. Or they might validate, yes, what you found is in fact what makes it difficult for us to access the benefits that we need. So validating is really important. And then, of course, developing the plan of action of how to address those barriers that have been identified in those issues. The next step is to implement that program. So that's, again, fairly straightforward, to create processes, teams, make sure there's accountability, and to start the hard work, which may include culture change and organizational change management, as well as perhaps some technical changes. For example, if there's bias in an algorithm that's being used. So that whole suite of things needs to be implemented. And then finally, it's very important that there's a continuous monitoring program that's been implemented. So developing metrics to assess how well you're doing, and to continue to get feedback from stakeholders who are affected over time to ensure that you're moving in the right direction. So that's our process. Again, happy to share our detailed framework with you. It's freely available. We'd love feedback. We'd love to help those of you who want to use it, and really appreciate your time in sharing this with you. Want to? Did you want me to speak to this?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Just to this slide just summarizes what I just covered with you. So these are just a few thoughts and best practices from the previous slide, which is to make sure you capture, in particular, lessons learned along the way as you're implementing these 4 steps. It's very, very important. So you're constantly improving your process. I mentioned the stakeholder engagement. So planning that ahead of time is critically important. It can actually take a while to identify the right stakeholders and also determine the processes that need to be used to gather their inputs. So that's sort of a lesson learned from some of the work that we've already done. And then the final point is just to be prepared to change and adapt as you go, and especially as you obtain data and information, some of which will be quantitative data and some of which will be qualitative. So some more practices based on our experience. Okay, there's the last. So thank you all so much. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Yes, thank you so much for the wonderful walkthrough, Dr. Lacho. So our contact information is here. And if you would like to try or learn more about the social justice platform or the equity assessment framework, Dr. Lacho or I would be pleased to hear from you. He's the best person to reach out directly about that. I'm happy to connect you or engage on any other topic. I did want to take a minute to acknowledge Dr. Victoria Gamino, who worked with me and brought some of the environmental lenses to what we were doing, and a posthumous ongoing thanks to Dr. Potter for providing that North Star for us together. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Dr. Williams and Dr. Lacho, for your participation. We are right on time. And now it's time to hand the floor over to Professor Dr. Lawrence Asu Bakri, an attorney at law and a doctor in bioethics and biology, and she will be presenting her talk entitled Human Rights Facing the Challenge Generated by the Development and Use of Artificial Intelligence in Biotechnology and the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. President. You hear me? That's okay? Yes, that's okay. First, I want to make a congratulation to our president, Mr. Marcelo Palacios, and all the team, because it's very difficult to make a congress like this. And all my friends are very happy to see you now. I want to say that my English is not perfect, but I want to try the best for my conference. Okay, now I want to talk about human rights facing the challenges generated by the development and use of artificial intelligence in biotechnology. The advent of Superman was the last fear expressed by Stephen Hawking, the physician. He evoked the creation of improved human beings through modifications of their DNA, which only the rich will be able to access. In an open letter, he demanded the ban on autonomous weapons nicknamed killer robots. Between illusion and reality, AI fascinates, but also frightens. We find ourselves at the heart of this mysterious algorithm, both a mixture of statistics and probabilities. Artificial intelligence and innovation in the field of health are disrupting our lives and our values. Fascinates, but also frightens, and it projects fantasies as well as anxiety. In the next 20 years, artificial intelligence will exert its grip on almost all sectors. The impacts will be considerable in the areas of health, environment, of the evolution of practices, and the organization of patient care. The challenge will be to limit these impacts and to preserve health. Tomorrow's medicine should continue to place the patient at the heart of its actions. The development of biomedicine and the applications of biotechnology to humans raise new questions that go far beyond the scientific framework to reach all the human sciences: philosophy, anthropology, economics, analysis, law, research, medicine. 3 parts according to my schedule. First, IA, its development at the service of innovation. Second, the use of IA in human rights. And third, the state of the matter in the light of the most recent works. IA, its development at the service of innovations. It's defined as the set of theories and techniques implemented to create machines capable of simulating, reproducing human intelligence. It's a cognitive science that involves neurology, biology, and mathematical logic and computer science. It researches and uses problem-solving methods with high logical or algorithmic complexity. Artificial intelligence is development at the service of innovations in bioethics. The Bioethics Bill intends to establish an ethical framework for the development of artificial intelligence. It should be noted that the inclusion in this Bioethics Bill of the principle of human guarantee. Everything related to image analysis, for example, radios, scanners, etc., and therefore diagnostic assistance benefits from progress in deep learning. Medicine assisted by artificial intelligence system is democratizing, adds Professor Renaud Champion. You know, only 2.5 minutes is the time it takes to detect a brain tumor by artificial intelligence compared to 20 to 30 minutes by a doctor. Neurodegenerative diseases and cancers, two types of chronic pathologies which have the common point of feeling considerable research efforts aim at both their anticipation. Their diagnosis and the possible treatments enter into massive data in clinical research and use high throughput sequencing in connection with the cancer plan. Technology can help doctors to assess the pain experienced by patients who are unable to communicate. That is what Orange researchers are testing with the Nice University Hospital. Some hospitals are planning to use artificial intelligence to diagnose little scratchology at the entrance to emergency. Very important. In Japan, the society SIBI offers companies a continuous urine analysis for volunteer employees using an in situ sensor. In Canada, an artificial intelligence designed by the startup Animo offers to analyze the writings of volunteer employees' emails, instant messaging, to assess their mental health. Apotheosis, if any of the effects of artificial intelligence on disaster risk reduction, can the coronavirus be challenged in this way? Now, second part, the use of AI in human rights, some definitions. Definition of human rights are fundamental rights, indivisible and universal or regional rights linked to the human person and his or her dignity from birth to death. These rights are enshrined in written and unwritten international law. Bioethics. Bioethics, this bridge between the protection of human rights, the dignity of the human being on one hand, with regard to the application of biology and medicine on the other hand. Biomedical research and the application of biotechnologies to humans at the same time as they open the horizon towards improving the human condition through so many victories over diseases, disability, and suffering, raise new questions in terms of respect for fundamental rights. Now, definition of biotechnology. The OECD define it as the application of science and technology to living organisms, as well as their components, products, and models, modify living or not living materials for the production of knowledge, goods, and service. You know, artificial intelligence will be the electricity of tomorrow. The deployment of artificial intelligence cannot be avoided, but it should not be imposed on human beings. it remains thought as its work like a black box. You enter data, and the result is output. But it's not clear exactly what's going on in between. We can compare it to our brain. If we know its process and how it works, it's still very difficult to anticipate individual decision making. Be all versus human rights and bioethics. Nothing replaces the human expertise. If artificial intelligence is the electricity of tomorrow, data is the petrol, according to the professor Albert Legault-Vallier. See, artificial intelligence already subject to European legislation on fundamental rights. Had the Declaration of Human Rights of 1789, shouldn't it be supplemented to affirm that artificial intelligence enslaves the man, whom it should instead serve? The Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948, adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations, enumerates the fundamental rights, the recognition, and the respect by law. It does not, however, give them any real legal and precise scope. Simple proclamation of rights. However, it does not give them any real legal significance, thus reducing this text the reference in the field. Even today, this text the reference. Have also the European Convention of Human Rights of 1950. Article 2 covers the right to life. Article 3, inhuman and degrading treatment. And Article 8, respect for private life and family. After you have the Convention for the Protection of Human Rights Dignity of a human being with regard to the applications of biology and medicine, you know, of course, it's the Convention of Oviedo, dated April 1997. It constitutes the first binding legal standard of bioethics, and it includes ethical implications on consent and democracy. You have the Universal Declaration on Human Genome, and then the Universal Declarations of Bioethics in Human Rights of UNESCO, 2005. The consent of the person, Article 6, constitutes one of the fundamental principles to which the practices will fall within its field must satisfy. The principle is linked to the principle of autonomy and to the affirmation of human rights and respect for human dignity. The safeguard of human dignity, the first of the rights mentioned in the Declaration, represents the basis of the main principles relating to the human body, resulting from laws relating to bioethics. Artificial intelligence also enters beyond fundamental rights into a legal framework in France and in Europe. First, in France. Professor Cedric Villiane's report of March 2018 gives meaning to artificial intelligence for a national and European strategy, a priority development sector for artificial intelligence, and the creation of an ethics committee for digital technologies and artificial intelligence. In Europe, you have the white paper. It's a new framework specific to AI, and it's instituted by the white paper, which was published on February 2020. This white paper is to promote the regulation of artificial intelligence by creating an ecosystem of excellence and trust. this white paper have some observation on the benefits and risks of artificial intelligence, materially related to the fields of safety, health, non-material, privacy, freedom of speech, dignity, access to employment. The European Commission, in these white papers, intend to seize the opportunity of the economic wave generated by data. AI presents a series of advantages and risks, and discussed below. First, on the dangers related to the fundamental rights. Second, risk. Third, on the possible improvement of the regulatory framework to take account of these new potential risks. The white paper ensure effective application and implementation of existing community and national legislation, frame the limitation of the scope of existing community legislation, consider the evolution of the functionalities of artificial intelligence systems, and remove uncertainty as to the distribution of responsibilities between the different economic operators in the distribution chain, develop the concept of security. You are just a little late for the slides. I'm and after and after. Criteria are met by examining whether the sector and whether the use of IA involves significant risks, in particular from the point for the protection of safety. For the European Commission, IA should be considered high risk if two cumulative consumer rights and fundamental rights. Significant risks are likely to arise. The assessment of the level of risk of a given use could be based on the impact on the parties involved. For example, uses of IA which present a risk of injury, death, or significant material or immaterial damage. The white paper lists the obligation that operators should follow for high risk regarding the data used for training by making sure that the datasets are sufficiently exhaustive to consider all scenarios and limit to occurrence of risk, or by having datasets sufficiently representative to avoid discrimination. Keeping records of the data use the train to algorithm, documenting the characteristics of the datasets, the choices made, the techniques and methodology of design and training, the information to be provided, in particular of the use of IA and its degree of reliability, robustness and precision, taking into account the risk of IA from the design stage and ensuring error management during the life of the AI. Human supervision by having the results of the IA validated by a human being, allowing real-time intervention and leaving the possibility of deactivating the AI. In terms of governance, a European structure made up of public and private entities could emerge to strengthen the consistency of the application of these rules. And our conclusion, artificial intelligence must remain a graphic revolution in the service of humans. This right and their application to artificial intelligence require our vigilance. The first stage, of course, is to make citizens aware of artificial intelligence in order to inform and train them. We must preserve the impact of artificial intelligence in the world of the health, biomedicine, biotechnology, protect the patient in this global world. We are witnessing a paradigm shift associated with the coronavirus health crisis, in which artificial intelligence has taken place. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Doctor. We have a little bit of time. I don't know whether someone wants to ask a question or there is any comment. I do not see any comment. So maybe Mr. Montalvo or Erin William or Laurence want to make any additional comment or any clarification. We have some time.
Well, I can add, Laurence, it was wonderful to hear your presentation about artificial intelligence. It is definitely a growing area and one that deserves a lot of attention. I'm thinking I may connect you with some additional folks who are working on it in the United States as well. So I thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
If there is no further comment, we will now have a short break, 10 minutes. And then at 6:30, we will start with the next panel. Thank you so much to participants and speakers. Mr. Federico de Montalvo, well, he's not connected anymore. Erin Williams and her colleague, and Laurence. Thank you very much.
Marcelo Palacios of the Scientific Committee of the SIBI. For the second session of the afternoon, we were going to have Professor Calero, but we have not been able to connect with him yet due to technical problems. So we will move to the next speaker on the agenda, Mrs. Fatima Al-Kabir, from a lecturer at the Faculty of Sciences, Biology Department, Development Biology Laboratory of the University of Oran. She will talk about ethics versus biotechnologies, patentability of human genome sequences, and GMO. She is unable to attend, and she has ceded her intervention to Dr. Isolina Riaño, who will be kind enough to give her presentation in a moment. So, Doctor, you have the floor. Thank you very much. I will read the article written by Professor Fatima Zora Al-Kabir, who, as Dr. Palacios has mentioned, is unable to be here with us today reading this text. The last 50 years have set a new era of humankind in which biotechnologies in the area of living organisms have progressed faster than ever before. Scientific technology development has been a revolution for our knowledge, and they are a challenge that invites us to reflect on moral issues in the application of these technologies on human beings. These advances bring new responsibilities, and they pose a number of problems in terms of bioethics, human rights, such as the respect of autonomy, human dignity, free and informed consent, confidentiality of personal data, and compensation for damages. Everyone in society will have to choose these techniques as according to their needs, but these ethical standards is constantly evolving with the evolution of technology. Against the biotechnological power, ethics is a powerful tool that aims at questioning them, at stepping back and make the best questions possible to uh, bring what is good. Initially, the objective of bioethics was to generate wisdom. It appears that Professor Juan Ramon Lacadena is joining us as the moderator of this session. Dear friends, dear Professor Marcelo, we've known each other for a long time, and it is certainly a pleasure to have you here as the moderator of this panel. Professor Lacademia is the professor emeritus at the Complutense University of Madrid, and certainly a researcher that has provided a fundamental work in Spain, starting with his first book. And in the field of bioethics, he is a big figure that, amongst others, honors the SIBI, being a member of its scientific committee from its beginning. Professor La Cadena, you have the floor.
Marcelo Palacios.
Thank you very much, Marcelo. Let me begin by saying that it is an honor for me to moderate this panel, this afternoon panel of the 11th World Conference on Bioethics of the International Society for Bioethics. And I would like to address the participants and tell them that they will have 20-25 minutes for their interventions. After which we will have some allocated times for questions, if there are any. It seems that Mr. Lacadena is having connectivity issues. I will resume the intervention on behalf of Fatima Al-Kabir. The advances in the fields of biotechnology can no longer be considered as an analogous progress to that in other areas because it deals with controlling life, respecting the environment, and the nature of human relationships have changed. So ethical matters can be reduced to the above mentioned formula. What type of humankind do we want to be? Do we want to be a world of patents and GMOs, genetically modified organisms? So it seems that two are the big questions of the 21st century: biotechnologies and law. biotechnology brings us back to our responsibility in the light of technical and scientific progress, and the the law in turn confirms the obligation, the duty to act, questioning our right with regards to the human body is something that corresponds to humankind, going back to the principle of human dignity and the concern to preserve the individual as a unique being in the human species. The relationship between justice and technical progress makes us have to face a number of problems together with the democratization of policies in this area. These questions are part of the ethical destiny of humankind, so to speak. The question is no longer what is man, but rather what are we going to do with man? So the new technologies, the internet, nanotechnologies, and so on contribute to the balance of global powers, global forces, and they require an ethical space to respond to these challenges. For example, when it comes to the right to health, we need to bear in mind the relationship between the ethics of the individual and the ethics of the community and the ethical imperative of of the ethics versus profitability. There is also social responsibility, but there is a question that raises here. What is the relationship between ethics and biotechnology? Is there an interdependence between them? And to what extent, starting from the second half of the 20th century, um, is there a need to separate the knowledge as a purpose on its own and knowledge as a technique? Human dignity continues to be the milestone of ethics and bioethics by um, highlighting a number of principles that have been supported by all international institutions and the Consulting Committee on Ethics of France. Can we patent genes or their sequences in the human genome? Do we have the right to modify these organizations? And what are the consequences? We need two types of responses, one from the power and one from the duties, which aim at gaining a balance between a private and public interest. There may be a possibility to patent a living organism that can be related to the obtention technique, the organism as a whole, but also its genes. At the beginning, humankind was or individuals were excluded the from patents. However, the advances in biotechnology made it possible to patent gene sequences. So, what are the limits in the face of this development? Numerous patent requests throughout the world and biological advances pose a number of ethical and economic questions. The uh, a patent of a new invention that leads to an industrial application that is essential for economic growth, as it was the case at the beginning of the 20th century and and at the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century, must make a difference, must tell people and things apart. The simple sequence of the genome, it belongs to the area of knowledge, and it's not subject to be protected by a patent. If, on the other hand, an DNA sequence that has been extracted from its natural environment by means of a technical process is a know-how, then the technical process itself is what is patented. What are the limits? Can we patent living organisms? Can we prevent human beings from becoming mere goods? seeking a balance between the economic or the interest of research and protecting humankind is the challenge of the 21st century. The United States provided patents on gene sequence in the 1970s already. The European Patent Office in 1999 issued a regulation to respond to the ethical matters posed by these inventions. The Council of Europe, as a representative of the European public opinion, issued a recommendation on the 22nd of July of 2000 inviting member states to request renegotiation of the European directive, supporting Poland, the Netherlands, and Italy in their appeals against this directive. In March 2000, President Bill Clinton and British Prime Minister Tony Blair defended the idea of leaving human genome as part of of a public domain, but biotechnology companies' shares started to collapse, and Bill Clinton reassured the investors, stating that in no way would the U.S. policies change, and he defended openness and freely accessible human genome while recognizing and acknowledging the intellectual property protection of these inventions. The genome effect has boosted US startups who enjoyed 100% growth in the year 2000. Professor Mati, a geneticist, a French and European member of parliament and minister of health, urged Europe against patenting human genes. And that led to the French Ethics Council issuing a document to reconcile the protection of biotechnological inventions and ethical principles. Numerous research projects on different genomes have been publicized in the US, in Europe, and India, and Japan, and have been provided a great deal of resources. In June 2000, the National Ethics Committee in France issued an opinion against patenting human sequences, human gene sequences, and it asked to reconcile these issues with the Declaration of Human Rights by the UNESCO, which states that human genome is a property of human race. The Intergovernmental Bioethics Committee of the UNESCO disseminated the Declaration on Human Data in 2003, and it decided that human genome should be excluded from patentability, and it recommended including these in the intellectual property agreements. In 2001, the Court of Justice of the European Communities in Luxembourg rejected all six requests to cancel the European directive because it considered that it preserved the unavailability and unalienability of the human body as well as human dignity. In June and May 2001, Gilead Genetics, a US company, and its alliance network in Japan and Europe was granted 2 patents, and thereby making this company the exclusive and the sole proprietor of this patent. A court decision in the United States later decided otherwise. Can we patent isolated human genes? In this case, Gilead Genetics totally shook the U.S. law in terms of patents. The U.S. Supreme Court took a halfway position, deciding that a natural origin DNA sequence cannot be patented once it's been isolated, but complementary DNA is patentable because it doesn't have a natural origin. This allowed the United States to test or to run diagnostic tests by using an isolated DNA sequence. The French law is more constraining and prescriptive. Only an invention that is a technical application of a function of an element of human body can be protected by a patent. Now you can patent anything where a human gene extracted from the genome is included, as long as it's new and it gives a place to industrial exploitation. These could potentially lead to patenting most of the sequences that are part of the scientific discovery of the structure and functions of human genome. GMOs are organisms whose um, genetic inheritance has been modified to be assigned new properties. These poses ethical questions because very often we don't know the consequences of its use. The increasing industrialization of foods, the rapid expansion of agriculture and farming, especially soy, cotton, and colza, which are becoming more and more profitable, has undermined the trust on experts, committees, scientists, and decision makers. The consumer demands more transparency. They are concerned on the repercussions and the effects on their health, and they demand new legislation, new control, and very often they prefer to turn to natural products. Countries producing or manufacturing GMOs under the lead of the United States, such as Canada and Argentina, in 1992 opposed to ratifying the International Rio Agreement on Biological Diversity, and they also didn't sign the Cartagena Agreement. Chinese geneticist Qian Kui modified human embryos by in vitro fertilization, provoking a mutation of the genome to provide immunity against the HIV virus. Two genetically modified twins were born, known under the uh, name of Lulu and Nana. This practice poses very important ethical considerations. What happened to these twins? Did these mutations really provide him immunity? Have they developed other diseases, other pathologies? They remain anonymous, and we know nothing about their fate. This was condemned by the scientific committee and Chinese authorities, and CRISPR babies were forbidden. Some problems caused by GMOs are such as the rapid increase of allergies, especially in the United States, and that raises suspicions on the influence of such organisms. Another health problem is that the vast majority of transgenic DNA in foods um, disappear in the stomach and in the gut, but part of it could reach the thick gut and provoke alterations of gut flora. And so, before allowing for these to be commercialized, it seems vital to study the potential consequences of the new proteins and resistance to antibiotics, as well as the consequences of other GMOs. From the ethical viewpoint, the development of genetically modified organisms is framed within a polemic around patentability of living organisms. The innovation of these techniques and their commercialization include many controversies. Is very controversial. The true ethical issue here is to inform the consumer completely and intelligently to make them responsible of their consent, their collaboration, or their refusal. The Eurobarometer and the Public Perception Group of the Technologies of the European Federation of Biotechnologies of The Hague, after many surveys, has decided that the European public does appreciate the technological progress, especially genetic advances in the fields of medicines and drugs and um, medicines, but it's somewhat reluctant to using and consuming transgenic foods. Most European governments have accepted all of these advances since 1966, with the exception of Austria, Luxembourg, and amongst others. Should we not move forward more slowly when it comes to providing or to making GMOs available to the public? Should we not create a counter force against the power of industrial corporations? All these GMOs that are subject to patents must be labeled and must be traceable. If labeling GMOs is required, it's not only due to issues regarding race, but also in terms of freedom for us to know what we eat and for farmers to know what they are uh, harvesting. Current research on transgenic crops in the very few uh, farming countries is focused in four highly profitable uh, crops, and it completely neglects those that are needed in the developing countries, such as uh, beans or um, other cereals. In 2018, the expert consulting committee published a declaration on supervision and follow up of changes in human genome. These debates showed that the pros and cons of these genetically modified organisms should be re-evaluated, and it was stated that ethics should prevail. Many institutions um, have expressed themselves with regards to GMOs, and they have expressed various opinions. It is recommended that if a researcher has not registered publicly their test, they will not be able to publish their work and request public funding. As a conclusion, we could cite many other examples, but we um, narrowed them down to these examples. Human dignity, which is a fundamental principle of ethics and bioethics, places the person beyond any prize and beyond the status of a good. Humankind should be free, conscious, and informed. And all of these principles are highlighted by all international organizations, ensuring the respect for dignity and human rights. Versus biotechnology and scientific progress is a concern for all of those who worry about the fate of humankind. After using nature and animals, does humankind really want to deplete or exploit itself and bring itself down to a good that is economically profitable and patentable? Do we want to preserve humankind's genome by patenting part of it? Should the 21st century's Homus economicus store their discoveries in the Museum of Memory? Should a public observatory be created for GMOs that would be independent of producers? Should we uh, agree with Akant Words, who wrote that everything happens as if the fight between the ethical dimension and the economic demands were nothing more than a continuous restart of a fight. Thank you very much. And thank you to Professor Fatima El Kabir for this paper and for giving me the opportunity to read it.
Again, thank you very much to Professor Fatima Al-Kabir and also Dr. Selena Riaño for reading it. From a genetic standpoint, transcription is also very important. We have 5 minutes for some Q&A or for some comments. Any members of the panel would like to make a comment? Good afternoon, Juan Ramon. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for having invited me to be here this afternoon. I was listening attentively to Dr. Fatima's talk, and I have to say that I do not agree really with this approach, because many years have passed by since we started to study the genetically modified organisms, GMOs, and in all these years there has been no problem affecting human health or the environment. So I think 20 years ago it was timely to apply a principle, but I think it is good to turn a page and then, well, give way to the technological information. So I differ with the rapporteur or the speaker. Thank you very much, Dr. Montague. I do not know whether the Dr. Fatima Kabir can answer. I think it is best if we just send her the question in writing and she can answer later on, but not right now. Yes, but what would be interesting is to do it live right now, okay? So that everybody also can witness this debate, because it's very interesting for everyone. I would also like to make a comment, if you allow me. The Universal Declaration of UNESCO on Human Genome, 1997, quotes, genome is the basis of fundamental union, sorry, correction, my speaker, of the human family. And then it adds the symbolic sense. In symbolic sense, the human genome is a world heritage. So once you add symbolic sense, then all the kind of prediction vanishes, prediction on human genome, or at least that is my opinion. I would also have liked to comment on this with Dr. Fatima Kabir, but unfortunately it's not possible today. I don't know whether, yeah, Marcelo Palacios would like to make some other consideration. Professor Fatima cannot be here, unfortunately. However, we will send her your opinions and remarks so that she can have some time to answer. Thank you very much, Dr. Palacios. Also, tomorrow, we will tell Professor what has happened, and I am sure that she will love to establish some channels of communications, because that enriches knowledge. Professor La Cadena knows that we at the SIBI, he is a member of the SIBI since its foundation, we have always thought it was not good that statement of the UNESCO, the symbolic sense. For us, the definition of human genome that could not include the symbolic sense because it is a serious topic. Now, if the speaker agrees, we will give the floor to Professor Montoliu. And then we continue with our Congress. Yes, so that we can stick to time. Thank you. So we'll now give the floor to Professor Montoliu. He will talk about the genetic advances with CRISPR today, what we have advanced and what we should reflect upon. 25 minutes for your talk, and then we will have some time for a talk. Thank you so much, Dr. Palacio. Thank you very much, Dr. Lacadena. I need you to give me permission to share my talk, my slides, maybe someone from the organization can give me permission to share my slides. As Professor Cadena mentioned, let's talk about CRISPR, this genetic technique for genome editing, what we have achieved and what we should reflect upon before applying these kind of technologies. I will refer to some technical aspects because I think in the ethical discussion, we also have to be aware of what is really possible, the difficulties linked to this technique, and the solutions that have been proposed throughout the months. With Professor Loca, we have worked many times. And well, every time we meet, we find updates on technology that are good and timely for reflections. Firstly, congratulating Chaverdy and Jennifer Donna, who were the ones who proposed in June 2012 the use of a system of bacterial defense discovered by a microbiologist. And they proposed that this tool could be used to avoid any gene, any organism, because they count the DNA. And they boost the repair by means of two systems. One that is direct, that introduce nucleotides, and then they are deleted, but the gene is interrupted, and the result is usually that the gene stops working. And the other repair system, that is the one we would like to have always, but it only acts in those cases in which the cells are dividing themselves actively, but we can create a kind of a mold and induce that de novo sequences are introduced in the correct place. And this is what we understand by editing. With editing, we can mutate, correct, delete, activate, silence. And that is why people say this is a real revolution in biology. And this is affecting not only biomedicine, I will refer to biomedicine now, but also biotechnology, animal and plant biotechnology, and also biology in terms of control of plagues, and also the de-extinction of animals, for example. We have some projects in that regard, Otamuro, for example. In fact, the gen deletion is the most simple thing that you can do with these technologies. And I want to underscore this slide because I will talk about this at the end of my talk again. Because again, nowadays, and regardless of what we would like to happen, this is the main application of the CRISPR in terms of animal plant biology and also therapies to treat human conditions or disorders. Gene deletion is very simple and you get results very fast, and it does not pose many problems. We can delete a fragment of a gene even. This is a deletion that is frequent in many congenital conditions or duplications or any other chromosomal alteration. We can do very subtle things, as for example, introduction of specific mutations that allow us to specify and identify the effect of this mutation in the resulting organism. And if we can include a certain mutation, we can also correct it. We can introduce whole genes, or we can inactivate the capacity of cutting of these nucleases, and then we jump into another complexity level of our genome that has to do with the epigenetic information, not the genetic one, information related to modifications that, urge genes to be activated or not activated, because the nucleoside is still positioned somewhere in the genome thanks to the guide that is guiding it, and associated with a domain or a complex or with a new activity that may be activated. You can activate a gene or you can inactivate a gene. So some weeks ago, we found out about a surprising experiment. They turned these tools into real switches to switch on and off genes as you wish, interfering with the genetic layer, activating or inactivating or deleting a radical, or inactivating it and boosting this, the appearance of these methyl radicals. The limitations of these technologies are the following: that we cannot transfer freely what we are experiencing in the lab to the clinic or to patients. I am referring to two aspects: the possibility of inactivating similar genes, here illustrated with similar blues or blue colors. We want to inactivate the first of the genes, but then it is very similar to the other one that is in another position of the genome that can be also inactivated, and we did not want to inactivate it. We can use K nucleases that are more specific, and we can solve this problem. The problem lies really on mosaicism, because most of the repair done is using the left pathway, and that provokes endless number of solutions, but only some of them will be productive. These little mice should be pigmented in a uniform way, but it is not, because only one part of the body comes from cells where the genetic function has been restored. In terms of pigmentation, we have injected these reactives when the embryo only had one cell, but some inactivities occurred in many of these cells of the embryo, and not in an even way. And this is a problem that can be solved by sequencing some mice. So we can see that the sequences are very different. And in the lab, this can be solved very well. The mosaic animal that has been born can be crossed with another animal of the same species and with phenotypic different characteristics. And in the next generation, the phenotypes are segregated and you stick to what you want. This is very easy with animals, and it is easier in the case of plants. But this is unacceptable to be transferred to persons. You cannot treat a person and say that the result in the best of the cases is that some of the kids may inherit some of the corrected alleles. This is not possible for people, for persons. What are the solutions that have been implemented to try to overcome these limitations? Well, very smart solutions I want to share with you today. So very much evolved or adapted. They are not cutting the DNA anymore, but what they do is to modify chemically the nucleotides. In this case, the basis editors invented by David Jean in 2016. There are two types of them. You can turn a C into a T or an A into a G without having to cut the double DNA chain. there are many variants in this regard, and this is increasing. In January, we discovered a great use of this technology. This is an animal model of progeria, an accelerated growth associated to the cell L, and just an A could cause this condition, but thanks to the basis editors in these mice, we could go from life expectancy of 200 to more than 500 days of life expectancy. The other way to solve the problems in terms of genetic editing with traditional CRISPR systems is the prime genetic editing or of quality. We are using the transcriptase, reverse transcriptase that using a line of DNA that is equivalent to the other one, you expand it and then you introduce the wished mutation. This has been just checked, has just been tested only a month ago in animal models, and comparing a traditional alternative CRISPR-9 to the left versus a prime system to the right, you can see that corrections are similar, 56% to the left, 51% to the right, same order of scope. But what is important is what comes below. 40% indels mosaicism, 0% indels mosaicism, left and right. And this is what is relevant, and this is, well, what can generate therapeutic solutions. As we know, problems start when we start thinking about applying these technologies to human embryos. The first of the articles published in 2015 used these triple-nuclear zygotes, double fecundation. They are not productive, that is why they were selected, and it already, well, posed an ethical reflection, because the authors knew that these embryos could not even advance in the development if they had implanted them in the uterus of a woman. This was not in their project to use these embryos in human beings. What we found is what we usually found in embryos of other species, for example, mouse. We found mosaicism, similar genes modified. This has been repeated by different research groups in China, USA, UK, and also a group in Russia. It is important to recall the careful analysis risk-benefit that should be performed, more specifically in these kind of trials, to know that there are alternatives that are less invasive, as, for example, genetic diagnosis, and the legal and ethical issues related to the Article 13 and 18 of the Convention of Asturias, 1987. When we want to apply this genetic editing to therapy in Spain and in other countries, well, we have this convention, so we have alternative legal alternatives. In green, in this lighthouse traffic light slide, we have in green to cure or prevent a disease at a specific somatic level. In yellow, to cure or prevent a disease at an embryonary level. And what I would like to think that is undoubtedly to try to apply these therapies with a therapeutic objective to improve something, as for example, it is suggested by some people that are followers of this current transhumanism. For example, this researcher I admire, sometimes he launches some controversial ideas. The list of the wishes of George Church, no? some genes that could be used for men and women, etc., etc. Any genetic expert that is listening to this talk will realize that these kind of approaches forget about the complexity of genetics and that each of these genes is implied in different functions. And it is naive to think that the introduction of these genes or will only result in benefits and not alterations. And in fact, the radical transhumanists of, for example, Josiah Steiner, aim at modifying a gene, the MSTN, that occurs in nature, but it generates some alterations in welfare. Has also been mentioned the case of He Jiankui that in November in 2018 concerned all humanity with his experiment. He aimed at not activating a gene that is responsible for the human immunodeficiency syndrome. He could not generate it. He generated different mutations, a twin pregnancy and then another pregnancy, and then he was condemned and he ended up behind bars. This has given way to a great amount of reports on genome editing by different entities, associations, organisms, and the National Academy of Sciences of the United States. The latest report was published in September last year. The summary of this report, I fully agree with it, is the following. Genetic editing is not ready to be applied on human embryos because it is not safe or efficient. When it is allowed, it should be limited to therapeutic applications of severe conditions caused by mutations in one just gene. But we're very far from this situation. Worldwide, generally speaking, those countries in red, this is a slide by Francois Vélez, are those countries where it is forbidden the proliferation of the human genome. But in Mexico or in other countries where there is a kind of an exception in their legislation. So what should be of our concern is what happens with those countries in gray, because we know nothing about them. We don't know whether they will allow these experiments or no. As for germinal genetic therapy, I'd like to highlight in positive the strategies of in vivo therapies and also ex vivo therapies, extracting cells from the patient, working on them at the lab, and then bringing them back to the patient. 46 clinical trials altogether currently with CRISPR already using genetic editing. They are trials, they are not treatments, okay? Most of them are ex vivo, as for example, the treatment by means of immunotherapy of cancer, myeloma, sarcoma, very severe conditions. Some people who have very few days left of life. So they use the white cells by means of CRISPR to make them more aggressive and to eliminate the receptor of cells and replace it by a chimeric one that is targeting the cancerogenous cells. 32% of patients that would have died are still alive. Probably the most determining success, and that could be included in the success stories of CRISPR, is the treatment of severe conditions, blood severe conditions, as for example, thalassemia. Patients that need constant infusions or transfusions. In this case, for example, they have deleted the repressor that maintains suppressed the lama lumida. And with this first patient, Victoria Gray, in July 2019, now the result of these 18 months of follow-up or treatment have been published in green. You can see the bars, the green bars, are replaced by the blue bars that indicate that this person is now healthy. She does not need any more transfusion. So it is determining success of technology. As for in vivo treatments, retina by injections of intraocular injections, and they are in vivo. So the advantage is that you inject them inside the ocular globe, separated from the body by a barrier. And in autumn last year, we found out about a systemic trial, the introduction of nanoparticles to treat a rare disease. Final reflection on what we would like to happen and what really happens. What we would like to happen is that we were capable with CRISPR-R to correct that mutation, but in fact, this is only what genetic therapy has tried to do for many years without modifying the rest of the genome. And we know that this has been really, really difficult. And the first therapies, when they inserted the therapeutic gene, but there was a risk of inactivating the gene. This was solved thanks to the gene therapy 2.0 with these viral vectors. An example of something that has been used in Europe, in Spain, is Luxturna. Luxturna is a system based on some vectors to treat neurodegenerative conditions. They carry the RPS 75 gene that is injected. What is happening right now is that what we can do is what I said before in terms of cancer immunotherapy and as in many other treatments. What we achieve is to inactivate a gene, which we can do quite with a lot of accuracy. So we should go for alternatives. Alternatives are the basis editors, and I tell you about this because last week we knew about these editors and their role, and not in a very rare condition that does not affect many patients, but rather a complex pathology that affects most of us. And in fact, it is one of the main causes of death, which are the severe conditions due to the accumulation of cholesterol. So this team wanted to inactivate this cholesterol inactivation, I underline, of this gene, which actuates as a negative receptor of those proteins of low density. This gene normally decreases the amount of receptors, but if we inactivate the gene, it will increase the amount of receptors. And if they are increased, they will be withdrawn from blood, and therefore the circulating microproteins will be decreased, and therefore the circulating cholesterol will be decreased, and thus the risk of those cardiovascular diseases. And that with just one injection, and benefits are seen during the following 18 months. I think these are surprising, excellent results and very promising. I have 2 minutes left. I like to say something about CRISPR and COVID-19. It is also important to share with you some information about the benefits for us in terms of applications. The diagnosis applications, the most recent one has been proposed by the Nobel Prize General One last December. They use a CRISPR system that cuts an RNA from the coronavirus and generates a fluorescence that can be seen by our cell phone, our camera cell phone, thanks to the appearance of different molecules of fluorescence. I think this is surprising, and this could revolutionize the possibility of having very easy tests. And then finally, the use of CRISPR as an antiviral to cut the genome of coronavirus. As you know, it is an RNA molecule. In this case, there are nucleases that are specific against RNA, and this is what we have informed our consortium. And thus, the pandemic has given way to many multidisciplinary consortiums and societies. We have coordinated and worked together to cut the coronavirus genome with this new tool, CRISPR-Cas, in those sequences that are more preserved, as that of polymerase and nucleoprotein. I will finish as I started to close the loop. I think I have shared with you our achievements, what we should reflect upon before applying these technologies on us, on human beings. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much to my team for their work. Thank you to the funders as well for giving us money to continue working. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Montoliu. Every time I listen to you, I am in awe with everything that you are doing, as well as your capacity to to explain things in a very clear manner. It has been an extraordinary intervention with the vast amount that you have referred to. You have stuck to your allocated time, so congratulations for that. The discussion here, the debate here could take us many hours, but from the bioethical point of view, I am going to share some thoughts with you. I've said this many times, but I remember how impressed I was when I heard Dr. Severo Ochoa speaking at a conference saying that science is unstoppable. Yes, it is unstoppable because it is something that you cannot really bring to a halt. Everything that can be done will be done, and everything that can be done has to be done. So we are seeing that tools are very powerful, and from the bioethical perspective, and um, to pave the ground for this debate, I would like to mention. I remember in 1975 when the RNA combinant molecules were in their advent. The Asilomar conference was held to evaluate this. You say that there are things that we should reflect upon, as says the title of your talk, and I do think that there are many things that we should think about. Many years later, in 2015, there was the genomics initiative of forum on bioethics in Napa in California, and there it was said that um, these discussions, these fascinating discussions, will optimize decision making and open a way for a new era in biotechnology. So, with regards to these, my question is, what is the concern of those of you who work in such powerful areas from the ethical viewpoint? Thank you very much for your summary. I think we're going through fascinating times, and the last 40, 50 years have provided spectacular progress. I think I'm an optimistic, but I'm also cautious. And I would like for the entire uh, theoretical potential of these technologies really, really served to help the millions of people who are currently affected by diseases that are not, that cannot be cured. And so I think it's even rude to devote resources and time on applying these technologies to improve the human species. I think that's out of place. I think we are not serving humankind. It's not ethically acceptable. If we can use these technologies to relieve the pain of people, I can't really understand how people are considering using them to change the color of their eyes or achieving a greater intelligence, which we don't know how to do that anyway. So I think it's important to focus on what's relevant here. I think the latest modifications of CRISPR technology have evolved a great deal in 5 years since its advent. Um, Dozens of variants have arisen, and they are more and more efficient. And I think we are coming closer to them being tried or tested in clinical trials. And I think that will provide some therapeutical perspectives. I don't know if for the entire world population, but at least for some of them. Thank you very much, Louise. I would like to finish by reading something that was written in 1967 by Marshall Mirenberg, the discoverer of the key of the genetic code, and who was later a Nobel Prize. Humankind can uh, can understand how their genes works much before being able to uh, set goals and solve the ethical moral problems that will arise once humankind is able to issue instructions to his own cells. He will have to wait until he has sufficient knowledge to make this for the benefit of humankind. I think these are wonderful words, and they still apply, Juan Ramon. Thank you very much. Thank you, Juan Ramon.
No digo que muchas gracias. Pasamos entonces a ti.
Thank you for your presentation, which was tremendously brilliant. With this, we move to Professor Dario Vergel from Argentina, entitled The Impact of Plant Biotechnologies on the Environment and Human Health. I don't know where Salvador Dario Vergel is. Is he online? Is there on the stage?
Tenemos noticia de él.
He is not on this panel, it seems.
Doctor Palacios, Marcelo Palacios.
Dr. Marcelo Palacios? Professor Vergel will be broadcast in a video. If he is online, perhaps we could talk to him after the video, but for the moment, we will see the video that he has sent us. I would like to thank the organizers because they proposed the rational, responsible use of biotechnology on the environment and human health as the main topic, as the theme of this conference. We are witnessing a sustained increase in the development of new farming technologies that aim at a profound transformation of the plants inspired in uh, economic interest and the promotion of human health. Since the beginning of humankind, when man started cultivating the soil, agriculture evolved linearly, making it possible for humankind to feed itself. The farmer became a central figure. Agricultural development took place without harming the environment. The analysis of the various traditional farming systems and their related practices have shown that they play an important role in maintaining the ecological processes that are essential to ecosystems, and it manages the practices that protect soil from erosion and additionally improve the conditions in terms of fertility. Traditional agriculture made it possible for biodiversity to um, increase, and it made it possible for populations to feed themselves without harming the environment. The health crises that have um, arisen through history were the result of single crops. Two revolutions have intervened in this process, posing great questions about the future of agriculture. In the mid 1900s, the first great change in traditional agriculture appeared in what was called the Green Revolution, with the in massive incorporation of agrochemicals, the use of new farming machinery, and the phyto improvement outside of laboratories. All of these gave rise to what was called technological packaging. Farmers are unable to um, sow what the soil indicates and what people need. They uh, have to sow what the market needs. The green revolution has been fundamented or justified with the need to put an end to global famine. Against this, Capra believes that hunger in the world has nothing to do with the production of foods, but rather with poverty, inequality, and lack of equal access to foods and soil. The objective to put an end to hunger over the world was not accomplished. In 1966, the FAO analyzed or conducted an analysis over 160 countries, and it stated that many problems were due to the replacement of local species. In the 1990s, the second revolution occurred, the biotechnological revolution based on genetic engineering techniques. together with agrochemicals. If green revolution was a disaster for biodiversity, the biotechnological revolution um, has done the same. It has um, made the consequences of these technologies even worse, and we can observe a very small number of big corporations that are in control of seeds and are uh, making pressure to small farmers who have to make a choice. Either they join the world of agrochemical agriculture or they will be left behind. And in the middle of all of this is agrobiodiversity, which is a a recent concept that was first defined in uh, the scientific community. And it encompasses ecology, botanics, agronomy, etc. It's a multidisciplinary term and it reflects the dynamics and interactions between humankind, the um, cultivated plants, and their ecosystems. And it also has a relationship with local soils and ecosystems. It is the it is the fruit of the progress. The cultivation and selection of species throughout the years gave rise to an enormous diversity of grown plants, and it's also gave rise to agro ecosystems that are now threatened to disappear. The genetic diversity is in decreasing over the last years, and it's something that is irreversible in most cases. This is shown by the replacement of local traditional varieties, which are very diverse genetically, by other genetic varieties with high yield or uh, high performance. Vajana Silva's Indian scientist argues that single crop single crops are being justified with rapid growth and performance and high performance, but she says that these are not neutral terms. Improving a variety is not the same for the agro-food industry than for autonomous or self-employed farmers. Let us remind ourselves that the process that marked the relationship between humankind and nature was gradual. Farmers started separating the best varieties and looking for new characteristics by crossing different varieties to improve the results. These contributed to improving agricultural diversity, which gave rise to, or which caused a great deal of benefits in terms of adapting to the environment and facing many environmental challenges. Today, agriculture is dominated by biotechnology, and that led farmers to become mere seed consumers, which are sold by the big corporations. What was earlier a free exchange of seeds between neighbors to improve their varieties has become a business for international corporations who negotiate with seeds, but also with agrochemicals that contribute to soil erosion. Agriculture, according to Capra, agriculture and farmers have lost a great deal of their uh, freedom, and they have become consumers of production techniques. These techniques are not based on um, natural considerations, but they are determined by the demands of the market. Farmers can no longer grow what the soil tells them to, but what the industry tells them to. Against this backdrop, biodiversity is outstaged, and agriculture, traditional agriculture, is nearing its end. And farmers who were a fundamental figure in agriculture are becoming seed consumers. Food safety of future generations is seriously jeopardized as long as the economic interests of big corporations are favored without considering the consequences for the environment. The use of biotechnological techniques in agriculture with the aim of increasing production not only has economic and social consequences, but also ethical consequences with regards to human health and the environment. Jose Gomez Ferraz, a philosophy professor in Salamanca, Spain, has a brilliant essay where he argues that exfoliating nature is a serious act of injustice and insolidarity with human species, even more so with the power that humankind has with the technology, giving nature a temporary dimension that it didn't used to have in the past. The future of humankind has a number of duties and obligations and duties acquire new dimensions, new meanings on the basis of the progress, the technological progress. The risks for the future, which are made more serious by human action, are the uh, classic category of moral duties, and they have changed in their meaning. New varieties, new GMO varieties are introduced in the market continuously in order to improve the performance of crops. These varieties do not aim at improving human feeding or at fighting uh, hunger across the world, but rather they aim at providing better performance and therefore higher economic revenue for big corporations. In addition to that, these improved varieties are closely linked to the use of agrochemicals. And as a result of this, we can understand what that can mean to the environment. For biologist David Ehrenfeld, very often genetic engineering is presented as a human technology aimed at providing more and better food for the population. But that is far from reality. There are very few exceptions. More often than not, the objective of this field is to improve the performance of the crops and to make farmers more and more dependent of these corporations. Bioethics was disregarded in this field until the 1990s. The inclusion of biodiversity in the area of bioethics is the result of the Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights of 2005 by the UNESCO. It was an important and transcendent document which opened the way for new areas in this discipline. Article 2 of this declaration describes the objectives, and one of them is to highlight the importance of biodiversity and its preservation as a common concern of the human species. And in Article 16, it is stated that all of that the interconnection of humankind and the rest of the living organisms is to be borne in mind, respecting traditional knowledge and the role of humankind in protecting the environment, the biosphere, and biodiversity. Although preserving the existing biodiversity should be subject to correct policies to put an end to a environmental degradation process that is hard to assess, we should also work on promotion and development because biodiversity can not only seen as a historical process that is uh, frozen in time, but rather it should be regarded as a creative process to be improved. At this point, Otuar speaks of an enriched world and not just a preserved one. Biodiversity must be protected and not only preserved because it evolves independent of human activity. Biodiversity interacts with society. As we have stated, agriculture was born and evolved with the sustained efforts and the creativity of generations of farmers. Over the course of time, farmers integrated better uh, plant varieties to adapt to the characteristics of the soil and the weather conditions of different regions. Today, agriculture is dominated by other players who seek other purposes. They launch improved varieties on the market obtained with artificial procedures that um, aim at improving financial revenue, economic performance, and do not consider environmental consequences. Even though the aforementioned Article 2 of the resolution speaks of preserving biodiversity, when you read the entire text, you get a clear overview of this matter. Article 17 defends universal free access to natural resources, both biological and genetic, taking two principles into consideration. The first of which is respecting traditional knowledge in the management and use of nature, which must be taken into account in any economic process that is based on the biomass. The second one is the joint protection of the environment, the biosphere, and biodiversity, which are regarded as being interdependent of each other. It is clear, therefore, that the declaration is not inspired in an anthropocentric model, but rather uses a biocentric approach. Everything that happened after the Green Revolution, and more especially after the biotechnological revolution, has been aimed at destructing biodiversity. The destruction of biodiversity is a relevant problem that should be on every international agenda. If we do this too late or neglect this problem, um, we will be thrown into a nuclear winter. As we have stated, the theme of this conference is the responsible, rational use of biotechnology in medicine and the environment. We have chosen to speak about agriculture, so these issues should be respected. Rationality should be aimed at not compromising future biodiversity. It is the result of a long evolution of agriculture, which will make it possible to feed human population. This includes the environment. Environmental ethics demands to overcome traditional principles and attribute a high value to nature and the ecosystems that we want to protect. There is a need to measure the consequences of human actions in fields as complex as new. Ulrich Beck used to say that if we're not ready or capable of foreseeing the consequences of a given research project or industrial activity, as is the case in the areas of genetic engineering, then we should not act at all. In the face of innovative techniques, it is mandatory to act with responsibility. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Me alegro mucho.
Thank you very much. I am pleased to see you, my dear Salvador, many years, um, after many years of friendship. I regret, however, that there is not an opportunity to talk to you directly because I must say, with all due respect, that I disagree with 90% of what you've said. And I don't wish to offend you, but rather to discuss with you. But unfortunately, I believe that will not be possible today. There are many things that could be done better, yes,
Gato, contra.
but your words against modern agriculture and the application of genetic improvement, I must say that as a professor in genetics and a agriculture engineer, I strongly disagree with many of the things that you have mentioned and many of the things that are um, also sustained and defended by prestigious authors. Your intervention is entitled The Impact of Plant Biotechnologies on the Environment and Human Health. Well, with regards to human health, I think we have a marvelous example of genetics, such as golden rice, which was obtained by a scientist who was able to use the synthesis of beta carotene and he made it possible for the main food, most important food of millions of people in India, in China. This food generated or gave rise to lack of vitamin A, but with this innovation and by including provitamin.
So thank you very much to you all. Have a nice evening and see you tomorrow. Big hug. Thank you. Bye.